Hello, today we are going over Chapter 8 of our textbook, Creating a Republican Culture, 1790 to 1820. Now, we have banks, manufacturing, and markets. We um, are starting to get off on our own foot. We've declared our independence, obviously, and kind of moving forward. So you have this republicanism and an economic life in the 1800s where there was a lot of private property. You started to be able to own more for your own, and there was a market exchange, meaning basically you could buy and sell things. There was a lot of opportunity, and people were very active within the government. You had the first people to become millionaires in the United States. Astor and Oliver were their last names. And by 1781, we created the Bank of North America. Now, this was huge because this allowed for loans to start to happen. And when you loan things out, you start to get a lot more businesses and other things that are being able to grow and prosper because now they have that initial loan, initial capital to be able to go out and purchase things and then turn around and sell those. Jeffersonians attacked the bank, saying it was unconstitutional. Some of you may understand or realize if you've studied up on history or you actually understand the musical Hamilton, you'll see there's some connections to Alexander Hamilton and different characters throughout early American history and banks and whatnot. We have the Panic of 1819. Think of this kind of like as a depression, a financial decrease type thing. But it started to let everybody in America realize that, hey, we're going to have booms and busts too. Everything's not going to be easy and fantastic. You started to have artisans, which were like your small local producers of goods that would buy and sell and trade and barter their items versus entrepreneurs who started to buy a whole bunch of things and sell them and kind of turned it into the business of buying and selling things. Technology started to play a role into this, and the technology that I'm referring to here is water, and more specifically the water wheel. Think of the water wheel pictured over there on the side as power, electricity, modern day electricity, right? We plug something in and it works. Well, back then they didn't have electricity, but what they did have is water. And so the water would push that wheel, and that wheel would be connected to something, and it would turn something. Think of it like a loom or an old school sewing machine type thing. The rural economy started to change. Instead of, let's say I lived in the middle of nowhere, instead of me making and growing what I needed for my family to survive, I started to focus in on one product or one aspect of a product, and I focused on that and would sell it. And so now, instead of making and using everything for me, I am making something and selling it for money that I then turn around and go buy things with. Transportation also needed to change. We start to get turnpikes and canals. Now, neither one of those are anywhere close to us, right? Turnpikes, if you've driven in California, they're like a toll road, kind of like a private freeway. We don't have any here in the Las Vegas area, but that's what turnpikes are. And then canals are basically water freeways, waterways that boats can ride on and transport their goods. Now, we had public enterprise with the Commonwealth system. I just gave you here the definition of the Commonwealth system. It's the Republican system of political economy created by state governments by 1820, whereby states funneled aid to private businesses whose projects would improve the general welfare. So as we talked about those turnpikes and those canals and different things, those would be publicly funded, meaning taxes and different things, but they would be a benefit for everybody. Okay, jump to modern day terms, freeways, not quite like that anymore because they're maintained and owned by the government. But think of the new Raider Stadium. There was huge amounts of tax money that was given to help fund the Raider Stadium, the Allegiant Stadium. But in return, we as a society are going to benefit with jobs and with tourists and different things that will come and experience it and enjoy it and spend money, which benefits us. Now, opportunity and equality for white men. The American social order was different from that of Europe. Europe, you had these kings and queens and aristocratical families. That's a tough word for me to say. But here in America, you don't have those. You have individual families. You have individual groups. There isn't necessarily a hierarchy of things. To be the architect of your own fortune is honorable. It is the highest recommendation. Meaning we can come here, we can start as a poor, lonely farmer's assistant, and then over time, we can own hundreds of acres and be able to become very successful. It's the American dream. The rules and laws, though, restricted women and African American men. Disenfranchisement. I'm going to say that again. Disenfranchisement. That word means limiting the voting rights, limiting the abilities of certain people when it comes to voting. They started to institute property holding requirements in order to vote, and African Americans and women did not own property. Now we're starting to move toward a Republican family, and we have patriarchy, which means where the male is in charge, and it says was not a natural rule but a social contrivance and could be justified only for the sake of order of families. Mercy Otis Warren saying, patriarchy should not be the way it is. It's that way because society says it is, but we need to change that. There were a lot of arranged marriages before this time, wealthy families marrying off to other wealthy families to kind of keep statuses, but as economy started to change and people started to have more freedoms in moving, that changed to companionate marriages, which are more like marrying for love. But still, the husband dominated the family, and culture supported that. There were laws that supported that, that the male in the family was the powerful one and had dominion. You also have this thing called Republican motherhood. Birth rates are starting to decline. Some of the reasons for that is you don't need as many children, or it's not as easy to have as many children, or they're getting married later, or men are moving to certain areas and there's more men than there are women or whatnot, or different things, or there's not enough men for all the women and so they're getting married later. Those things all play into it. But the idea of Republican motherhood is to instruct or teach the children, mainly specifically the son, the principles of liberty and government. So it was the mom's responsibility to teach them those lifelong lessons. Now, raising the Republican children, they started to support publicly supported education with the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. Now, obviously on writing there's a W missing, and off arithmetic there's an A. So basically your reading, your English, and your math. Very few students actually went to school. At first it was very much a status symbol who was going to school and who could be able to afford it. But by 1820s they started to raise some of the educational standards, saying teachers had to have certain qualifications in order to teach. In 1789, a man by the name of Webster created what was called the blue-black speller, which is modeled right there off to the right. Now, slavery, still going on, right? 1776 to 1800. Some slaves started to help the Patriots. In some northern areas, they would devote their allegiance to the Patriots in order to gain their freedom. Now, you have this term called manumission, which is basically just freeing the slaves. There were 2 main reasons during this time period why people were freeing the slaves. One of them was religious reasons. Quakers, Methodists, Baptists saying, morally it's not right. The intellectual one, this Enlightenment, challenges race beliefs. We're starting to understand Enlightenment with nature and our surroundings and realize there is some equality amongst us. Despite emancipation laws in the North, by 1810, about a fourth, 1/4 of African Americans were still slaves, or Africans were still slaves. In the South, they said the most valuable and indispensable article of our property are slaves. Slavery in the South was essential. They had grown such an environment and a society that there was no other way that the cotton and the tobacco and the rice and all these things that were needed would have been able to be produced without slavery. And so to them in the South, it was indispensable. We cannot live without our slaves. Many people also called slavery a necessary evil. Yes, it's horrible, but it is necessary. And that was kind of their viewpoint. And if you stop and think about it, the South was growing the cotton. The North was manufacturing that cotton, and both North and South were wearing those clothes. So even though the North was doing away with slaves, they were still benefiting from slavery and its outcome and output of what it was there. So yes, it was horrible, but to those people at that time, it was this necessary evil where they felt like they needed it to be able to still accomplish and get what they needed. The North and South are starting to grow apart, okay? The North is better educated. There's more equality. It's not perfect, but it's definitely better. The South, people were saying they were squandering their wealth. They don't want to provide anything for others. Kind of a selfish mentality. The textbook goes in and quotes a few visitors from England, from Europe, that are coming over, and these are their takes on what they see. Slavery is starting to become more of a political issue in 1787. Now, in 1808, the Atlantic slave trade is outlawed, meaning you can no longer import slaves from outside of America. Well, slavery is still around, so that is going to lead to the question, well, we need more slaves, how do we get them? And ultimately, it's going to be through slaves having children, is how that is going to continue. The cotton boom in the South happened started in 1812, kind of bounced around depending on the year, depending on what state it was in. But with more cotton, you need more slaves. Now, if the Atlantic slave trade's outlawed, what are we going to do to be able to increase our slave numbers and our workers? And that's kind of some of the struggles they're dealing with. You also had an organization created by Henry Clay in 1817 called the American Colonization Society. And this society basically argued that slaves had to be freed. So number one, we have to free the slaves. And then number two, we need to resettle these slaves, meaning we need to move these slaves somewhere else outside of America, or else it's going to cause a big conflict. We can't free them and leave them here because then it will upset people. We need to take them, and ultimately what the American Colonization Society did is they moved them to Africa. If I remember right, it was about 6,000 or so people that they did. Now, this idea is going to pop up again later on in history, post-Civil War, and there's some problems with that. Number one, many of these people, these freed slaves, considered themselves Americans, not Africans. Maybe they'd never even lived in Africa. Their parents or grandparents had come over, but not them. And that's going to be number one. That's going to be the biggest issue that they're going to experience, is this idea that many of these freed slaves don't look at themselves as African anymore. They look at themselves as Americans. Now, the Missouri Crisis, once again, slavery turning political, causing all kinds of drama, 1819 to 1821. 1819, Missouri applies to become a state. Typo there, sorry. It's not going to happen until 1821 because of this compromise and drama, but Missouri could become a state only if it banned the entry of new slaves and emancipate existing slaves, was one of the conditions that they put on it. Well, the North was all for that. The South was completely against it. It's all about balance of power. Is the North going to have more power, or is the South going to have more power when Missouri comes in? So the Southern leaders were outraged. This is a quote from the book that I think is comical when it comes to slavery. It says, "I wish someone would just put his finger on the place in Holy Writ." Basically, the South is saying, show me in the Bible where it says slavery is bad, is what that quote is saying. So the Missouri Compromise, political agreements, compromise happens all the time. They allow Maine to come in as a free state and Missouri to come in as a slave state. That will give one for the North, one for the South, and kind of make it equal. But if you look, Missouri's north of kind of the disputed free slave line. And so Missouri comes in, it really is going to change up the dynamics. It's going to play a big role in the Civil War and some of the different events leading up to that. Now, a Republican religious order. Religion is starting to play a bigger role, and people are a little worried that there's too much structure between politics and religion. So now they start to press freedom religion. That was one of the big reasons why we had the American Revolution. Well, now we're starting to push that again. Religious freedom. So some state constitutions required religious requirements for holding public office, and others didn't. You know, they're saying, no, we shouldn't have to be this religion to hold a certain political office. We should have religious freedom. So here we're digging into some problems, getting some things, but you're going to see this is going to play out later in the First Amendment. Now, the Second Great Awakening, not necessarily political completely, but it is going to change and redirect people's lives towards spiritual matters. So we've obviously had the First Great Awakening. Here we have the second one. Unprecedented religious revival that swept the nation between 1790 and 1850. It also proved to be a major impetus for the reform movements of the era. So some of these people involved in the Great Awakening were all for universal salvation. Everybody's saved. They would have these huge revivals, which are pictured here, and they would get up and preach and teach and spread the word of God and try to convert. Now, one of the big things that happened in effect out of the Second Great Awakening was you had cooperation among denominations. They created different organizations and they started to work together. And finally, women's new religious roles. Women began to take on new roles in churches, some kind of in leadership, but they were more open and more allowed to do things in churches than they were outside, right? Outside, they had very few freedoms and abilities, but within churches, some of that equality and freedom was presented. Gender segregation started to go away. Religious activism advanced female education, started up some colleges, some schools to be able to teach these women how to become teachers, and women took jobs as public school teachers. And the beauty of these women getting jobs in public schools or in city schools is we can kind of picture here the teachers all the way over there on the side. There's one girl and then the teacher. But these women were finally given a place in public life. They were respected. They were treated not quite as equals, but looked up and recognized the importance that they were then having. So this is Chapter 8, Creating a Republican Culture, 1790 to 1820.